Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking on what might be the single most consequential document of the 20th century, the Treaty of Versailles.
Absolutely. Signed in 1919, this was supposed to be it. The final closure to World War I.
A war that killed 20 million people and completely dismantled four empires.
The goal was a lasting peace without victory.
But that's not what happened, is it? Our deep dive today is going to pivot a bit from that classic story, the one that says the treaty just led to World War II.
Right, that's the long-term view.
We're looking at something more immediate, something, frankly, more insidious. The idea that the treaty was the direct catalyst that ignited a whole new kind of violence right after the war, and that it basically created the foundation for modern political terrorism.
It's a perfect example of how making peace can be, well, so much more chaotic than waging war.
The French Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau, he said that, didn't he?
He did. He said, making peace is harder than waging war. And he was right. The whole process was structurally flawed.
Because the defeated powers, Germany, Austria, Hungary, they weren't even in the room.
Not at all. They were just summoned at the end to sign a peace that was dictated to them, not negotiated. So our mission today for you is to unpack how this settlement created two sort of interconnected channels of violence that just exploded after 1919.
Okay, what are they?
First, you get this rise of domestic revolutionary terror-targeted assassinations in defeated states like Germany and Hungary. And second, you see the blueprint for anti-colonial insurgency emerge in new territories, these new mandates, in places like Ireland and Palestine.
All right, let's start with Germany then. That's where the shockwave really hit hardest. The Paris Peace Conference, 1919. It's dominated by the Big Four.
Right. Clemenceau from France, Lloyd George from Britain, Orlando from Italy,
and the American idealist Woodrow Wilson with his 14 points.
Exactly. But Wilson's high-minded vision, it didn't really survive contact with the other leaders. The final document was incredibly severe. The victors wanted Germany to accept full liability, and it all really starts with the most punitive terms.
You're talking about the war guilt clause.
That's the one, Article 231. It forced Germany to accept complete sole responsibility for starting the war.
Which was really a legal tool, right, to justify the reparations.
It was. It laid the groundwork for those massive financial penalties, which were eventually set at £6.6 billion in 1921. But the psychological effect
was total humiliation.
National humiliation. And it meant that from day one, most Germans just completely rejected the peace.
And it wasn't just about shame or money. The physical losses were crippling.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Germany lost 13% of its pre-war territory. It lost almost half 48% of its iron production.
And then came the military restrictions.
The army capped at 100,000 men. Conscription, totally forbidden. You put it all together. The shame, the economic disaster, the disarmament.
It's a bomb waiting to go up.
Political dynamite. And it detonated almost immediately.
The new democratic government, the Weimar Republic, they were the ones forced to sign it.
And their critics immediately branded it the diktat, a dictated peace. They claim they signed it, quote, at the point of the bayonet.
So how did that translate into, immediate breakdown?
It destroyed the government's legitimacy overnight. By 1922, Germany said it just couldn't make the reparation payments.
And the French response.
They invaded.
Yeah.
In January 1923, French troops occupied the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, to take payments in kind.
So the Weimar government tries to fight back by printing money.
They funded a general strike by just printing banknotes. And the result was, well, it was hyperinflation.
And these numbers are they're mind-boggling. A complete destruction of the currency.
It wiped out the savings of the middle class. Radicalize everyone. We're talking about a loaf of bread that eventually cost 100 billion marks.
100 billion.
That kind of collapse, it doesn't just destabilize an economy.
It destroys the social contract.
Absolutely. It's what made the economist John Maynard Keynes resign from the British delegation in disgust.
Right. He called the whole thing one of the most serious acts of political unwisdom. He saw exactly what was coming.
He did. And that chaos created the perfect environment for that first channel of violence we mentioned.
The domestic revolutionary terror campaign.
Think about those military restrictions. The army is cut down to 100,000.
Which means you have hundreds of thousands of trained, armed, radicalized veterans.
Suddenly unemployed. And they see the peace as a total betrayal.
So instead of going home, they form their own armies, the Freikorps.
Exactly. These were private armies. They saw themselves as the true defenders of Germany, and they hated the new democratic government. They saw them as traitors.
The November criminals.
The November criminals, who stabbed the army in the back. And these weren't small gangs. Some sources say they numbered between 200 and 400,000 men.
And the terrible irony is that the Weimar government actually had to use these same groups to put down communist uprisings.
Which just poisoned German democracy from the very start. It legitimized this ultra-nationalist violence.
So that mindset that the war just moved to a new home front, it morphs into organized terrorism.
It does, between 1920 and 1923. And we could define this as a systematic attempt to spark a civil war and install an authoritarian state.
And who was leading this charge?
The main group was the Organisation Consul, the OC. It was founded by a Freikorps leader named Hermann Ehrhardt, and its goal was simple: destroy the Republic by assassinating its key figures.
Their first major target was Matthias Erzberger, right?
Yes, in 1921. He was the politician who signed the armistice in 1918. So for them, he was the ultimate symbol of that betrayal.
And then a year later, a much bigger target. Foreign Minister Walther Rathenau.
A huge figure. He was trying to stabilize Germany by, actually trying to fulfill the treaty. He was also a very prominent Jewish politician.
And his murder really shows the deeper ideology at play here.
It exposed that toxic mix of anti-treaty nationalism and just virulent anti-Semitism. For the OC, he was the perfect target to purify the nation.
And the public reaction is what's so chilling.
It is. The sources show there was this widespread, almost celebratory tolerance for it. People would chant things like, well, like, someone struck down Walther Rathenau. When is the next Jewish pig?
It's just, it's horrifying. And it points to a massive institutional failure. We know there were at least 354 political murders by right-wing groups between 1919 and 1922. Why wasn't the state stopping them?
Because the judicial system was complicit. It was notoriously biased.
How so?
The data from the time is clear. Right-wing killers got incredibly light sentences. Sometimes they were even acquitted. Meanwhile, left-wing agitators got the harshest possible punishments, including death sentences.
So the state itself was sending a message.
A very clear message. Violence from the right to destroy the Republic carried almost no risk, but defending it from the left was incredibly dangerous.
It effectively validated terror as a political tool.
And paved the way for groups like the Nazis to just pick up that blueprint and run with it a few years later.
That's a terrifying look inside Germany. But let's pivot now, because the violence wasn't just contained there. You mentioned a second channel of violence in what some historians call a Central European Civil War.
That's right. While the West was celebrating the armistice in 1918, fighting just continued across Central and Eastern Europe all the way to 1923.
What was driving that conflict?
It was this vast, unstable shatter zone left by the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires.
So all these new groups, Poles, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, are suddenly in a race for independence.
A race for territory and borders. Before the peacemakers in Paris could draw the lines on a map, it was chaotic, localized, and the front lines were constantly shifting.
And this fighting was different from World War I. It was much more brutal towards civilians.
Absolutely. The violence shifted from trench warfare between states to paramilitary atrocities between ethnic groups, and tragically, Eastern European Jews were targeted by almost everyone.
The pogroms in Ukraine were particularly awful.
Horrific. We're talking about over 100,000 documented deaths between 1918 and 1919 alone.
Let's use Hungary as a specific case study of this turmoil.
Hungary is a perfect example. After the war, there was popular unrest, then a short-lived communist regime, the Hungarian Soviet Republic.
And they had their own Red Terror.
They did, with paramilitary groups like the Lenin Boys. But when that government fell, it was replaced by a counter-revolutionary White Terror.
Which was just as brutal, if not more so.
It was. It was a campaign of revenge, targeting Jews and working-class activists blamed for the communist regime. We're talking up to 3,000 Jewish casualties by 1922.
And the government that emerged from that.
The autocratic Horthy regime, its entire ideology was based on something called the Szeged idea,
right,
which was explicitly about reversing the territorial losses from the post-war treaties.
So again, borders drawn in Paris are directly fueling targeted violence on the ground.
Undeniably.
Okay, so let's zoom out from Europe and look at the global consequences. Because you argue the treaty really marks a shift, the end of one era of terrorism and the beginning of another.
That's a crucial point. Before World War I, you had what we call the first waves of terrorism, the anarchist wave.
Their goal was what? Global revolution?
Exactly. A global, systemic overthrow of all states, all monarchies. But World War I destroyed those old empires. The political landscape was totally remade around nationalism and the nation state. So Versailles basically ushers in the second wave, the anti-colonial or nationalist wave.
The goal changes completely.
Completely. Instead of destroying all states, the focus becomes achieving sovereignty within these new state borders.
And in the Middle East, the vehicle for this was the mandate system.
Right. The Allies just took over the old German and Ottoman colonies, but under the guise of the League of Nations.
Frustrating all those hopes for genuine independence that they'd been promised during the war.
The mandates basically institutionalized a sense of betrayal, and that frustration led directly to new tactics for insurgency, asymmetrical warfare.
And the textbook example of this new blueprint is Ireland.
Absolutely. The Irish War of Independence, 1919 to 1921.
What did the IRA do that was so new?
Instead of fighting big conventional battles they knew they'd lose, they used small, mobile units, flying columns.
Yeah.
And they focused their attacks on the security forces, the police, the Royal Irish Constabulary, and the Black and Tans.
It was a strategy of attrition, make the occupation politically unsustainable.
Exactly. And that model, that insurgent blueprint, was copied all over the world.
And we see that same structural failure, that same time bomb in the Palestine Mandate.
A direct outcome of the post-WWI settlement. But it was built on a catastrophic contradiction.
On one hand, the British committed to supporting Zionism, a national home for the Jewish people.
And on the other, they had promised independence to the Arabs during the war. You can't do both.
The conflict was baked in from the start.
It was. And it led immediately to violent riots and communal conflict, starting as early as 1920, all driven by that Arab disappointment that genuine independence wasn't coming. The mandate system made violence like the only way to change the facts on the ground.
This has been, a truly chilling deep dive. So let's summarize the key takeaway for you, the listener. The Treaty of Versailles was so much more than a prelude to World War II. It was a pivot point. It essentially weaponized the trauma of the war, channeling it into organized political and ethnic violence.
And it did that in two ways. Through ultranationalist terror against new democracies, like in Germany.
And through organized insurgency against new colonial rulers, from Ireland to Palestine.
The treaty really gave them everything they needed for the next generation of conflict. It gave them the motive, that deep sense of national humiliation.
It gave them the target, the new democratic or colonial government.
And it gave them the manpower. Millions of radicalized, demobilized soldiers ready to keep fighting.
And what's so striking is just how fast and effective this violence was at crippling those new governments.
Especially when you combine it with that institutional complacency we saw, like the bias courts in Germany. It just eroded stability and validated extremism.
It paved the road for groups like the Nazis.
It did. And that leads me to a final sort of provocative thought for you to take away. If the peacemakers of 1919 unintentionally created the tactical and ideological models for 20th century political violence, from assassinations to insurgencies, it really raises an important question. What structural failures in today's international settlements, in our global borders, or our economic systems might be creating the ideological and logistical blueprints for the conflicts of the future?